Who are your saints? Your holy people. Your faithful to goodness and hope departed. Who do you bring with you today? And remember surrounding us in the cloud of witnesses when we gather at the altar to sing with all the heavenly hosts. Were they doctors? Shepherdesses? That would be cool. Soldiers? Queens? Did you meet them in lanes? Whenever I sing that song, I wonder, it makes me think of bowling alleys, but I think it's British, and so they mean like little streets. Or at school, or at tea. That's how we know it's British. Were your holy people the holiest and purest of all people? Seeming to hover above the ground a few inches and never getting their hands dirty? Or were they real people with messy lives who were somehow able to courageously embody God's merciful love, even in complicated situations and stressful moments? A few years ago, my dear friend Will died.
R.I.P. He'll be missed.
I think I've mentioned him in sermons before because I remember Wesley doing that exact thing. It felt too soon when Will died, and he'd already had 9 lives. And then he had a sudden and unexplained decline. He was my wonderful, older, wiser, and naughtier friend from seminary. And he taught me a lot about the world. And he was also Hazel and Wesley's godfather. And he spent Thanksgiving and Christmas with us, so he was really a big part of our family. And we still miss him all the time. So when we were planning his funeral at St. Gregory's up in San Francisco, there was a clergy person of the diocese who insisted that he take a part in this funeral service. And I knew that Will deeply disliked this person because this person had been actively unsupportive of him in a difficult time. And unfortunately, for several very good reasons, Paul Fromberg, the rector of St. Gregory's, could not say no to this person. So we were all going to have to be a part of this service and have this person being there as a part of it as well, having some leadership in the service that we knew Will would not want there. So I wrestled with what to do. As sort of like the closest family member organizing the service, should I say to this person, no, Will would not want you there? Or should I just accept it? And I talked to some colleagues about it, and I finally was like, well, I'll just be a big girl and accept it. So when I arrived at the church for the funeral, Paul, the rector, told me that this unwelcome participant had texted earlier in the morning to say that he had food poisoning. And he couldn't.
That's good.
And he couldn't come. And I was flooded with relief. And I said, Will did that. He reached down from heaven and he bestowed that food poisoning. And Paul laughed, but he said, no, Will would never do something like that. Paul is wrong.
We would definitely make sure the food was undercooked. For that guy, because if you undercook something, that means that if someone eats it, they get food.
Maybe. I don't know how he did it, but I know that Paul was wrong. That Will would definitely have done that. He would not inflict lasting harm, but 24 hours of intestinal distress to keep that guy from the funeral, and to spare all of us the unpleasantness of pretending he was welcome. While we were grieving someone we dearly loved, Will would definitely do that. And you know what? He's still a saint to me. He is one of my most beloved and faithful departed. Will lived with HIV for most of his life, contracting it in the 80s and dying in 2023.
Which means that you kind of have to chunk of determination.
True. Can you let me preach my sermon, please, Wesley?
I will.
Thank you. So Will spent his priestly career as a hospital chaplain, mostly with children who had really severe illnesses, ministering to them and their families. Such a hard job. Children dying. And yet he did it so faithfully, so lovingly, drawing on his own experience with near death and his faith in God's unfailing love, and faith in God's very near presence when we are suffering. I think that we human beings can get a lot wrong about saints. Maybe it goes back to the veneration of them as almost magical when their relics bestowed miracles. We expect saints to be perfect and pure. And in our popular culture, I think we really struggle with this too. A person is either good or bad. There's no in between. There's no in between. At one extreme, if we find out a person made a past mistake or said a wrong thing, they might be canceled. At the other extreme, a person might be beatified, and the hateful things that they said and did are denied, whitewashed, and we are not allowed to tell the truth about them. Sometimes we have heard we have a hard time seeing and understanding holiness in public figures, and sometimes in up-close figures too. And that's why I love this gospel lesson that we have today as an All Saints reading. The traditional interpretation of Zacchaeus, and apparently there's even like a children's Sunday school song about wee Zacchaeus. Do some of you know this one? Yeah, okay. So the traditional interpretation of Zacchaeus is that in this story, he's like a little guy, and when he sees Jesus, he climbs the tree and he sees Jesus, and he's welcomed by Jesus, and he experiences a conversion from his sinful ways as a tax collector. But apparently, in the last several years, there's been a real shift in understanding of the story related to a translation difference. And so, once again, my sermon sort of hinges on this translation difference. So last week it was a preposition, and this time it's a verb tense. When Zacchaeus describes giving his money to the poor and repaying those who have been defrauded, it turns out he's not speaking in a future tense. He's not saying he will do this. He's actually saying he already does it. He's saying he is a person that does these good things. Jesus knows that Zacchaeus is something unexpected. He's a holy and righteous tax collector. Jesus truly sees his goodness, despite social categories. But the people that Zacchaeus lives with every day, and the people in the crowd in this story, cannot see beyond their bias against tax collectors. And it was a legitimate bias, because they were sort of known to be corrupt and to be really getting rich off of the working folks. But Zacchaeus wasn't. Even the phrase small in stature, which as a Sunday school story is always interpreted as this is a little guy, might have actually meant he was not respected. He was seen as lowly.
So he could have been both small in stature and small
Yes.
in terms of the social hierarchy.
You're right, he could have been. They wouldn't even let him get a glimpse of Jesus because of their incorrect judgment of him. So he climbed this tree. That's how great his faithfulness and longing to see Jesus was. And Jesus sought him out. Jesus saw the real him, saw the holiness in him that others refused to see. In her wonderful book, Ordinary Mysticism, Mirabai Starr writes about the personal flaws of Teresa Avila and Siddhartha Gautama before he became the Buddha. She says, our spiritual heroes were not always nice. She says, they didn't always behave in the ways that we associate with sanctity. They were sometimes petty and grumpy. They binged on salty snacks and drank too much sake. They could be self-involved or easily offended, just like us. Please don't be disappointed, she adds. This is not a problem. It's great news.
Yeah,
it means
after all, they're people too. And people are willing to do stuff like that.
I'm not letting you listen to my sermons anymore because you're basically trying to preach it for me.
That's a starting context,
Okay.
which may be needed.
Okay.
Even God knows that.
All right. All right. I'm going to start this paragraph over. Please don't be disappointed, she adds. This is not a problem. It's great news. It means that if these mythic mystics can mess up, we can forgive ourselves for all the ways that we participate in the human predicament. What is interesting about the saints is not the way that they match up with some exalted image of holiness, but rather that they were ordinary, extraordinary people. Their quirks and faults are intertwined with their gifts. We do not turn to them despite their shadows. We appreciate them because they were human beings doing their best to love unconditionally, to give of themselves extravagantly, to forgive their neighbors and themselves again and again, just like us. I love how she names that holiness means doing our best, to use our gifts, mindful of our flaws, and willing to apologize when we act on them. It means striving to pattern our lives on the kind of love that Jesus embodies, and hopefully succeeding more often than we fail. And this is the kind of doing our best that requires faithfulness, that our actions make a difference, and our effort matters in the great scheme of the good thing that God is doing in the world. All the readings that we are given today have this theme of faithfulness in them. The faith Zacchaeus has that doing the right thing matters, even if his neighbors refuse to see his goodness. The faith that Habakkuk has that God's promise will come true in God's time, even if it does not feel soon enough. The Thessalonian Christians' faith, which allows them to persist in loving others and doing good works, despite the persecution that they're experiencing. All of these people were living through political turmoil and persecution, living with fear and anxiety for themselves and their neighbors, just like us. If, like the author of our opening hymn, we mean to be saints of God, it comes through this kind of faithfulness. The Hebrew word for faith used in Habakkuk literally means trusting that God is trustworthy. Trusting that God is with us in difficult times. Trusting that God's promise for an abundant and just future will be fulfilled for all people. They lived not only in ages past, there are hundreds of thousands still. The world is bright with the joyous saints who love to do Jesus' will. They are saints of God, whether rich or poor, and we can be one too, by living lives of ordinary faithfulness, letting our trust in God fuel our efforts and our goodness, offering love and service to all people, because God has promised us it matters, and that we are needed to make that abundant and just future real.